Commander Zekthar had witnessed 1,000 battles across the spiral arm of the galaxy. His 4 eyes had seen species rise and fall, watched as civilizations crumbled under the weight of superior firepower or tactical brilliance. The Vorthak Empire had conquered 17 star systems in his lifetime, and he had been there for every single campaign. Yet as he stood on the observation deck of the dreadnought Eternal Dominion, watching the small blue planet rotate peacefully below, something felt different about this upcoming battle. The humans had been a curiosity at first. When the Galactic Council had first encountered them 3 cycles ago, they seemed unremarkable. Average physical strength, limited technological advancement, no natural weapons or armor. Their homeworld, which they called Earth, was rich in resources but defended by what appeared to be primitive spacecraft and outdated energy shields. The Council had classified them as a Class 3 civilization, barely worth formal contact protocols. Zekthar remembered the initial reports. The humans had greeted the first diplomatic vessel with what their translators interpreted as enthusiasm. They had shared their culture freely, offered trade agreements, and even invited Council representatives to visit their cities. Most species, when first encountering the vast networks of galactic civilization, either cowered in fear or immediately sought to align themselves with the strongest faction. The humans had done neither. They had simply welcomed everyone. "Sir, the human delegation is requesting another audience," reported his aide, a young Kreltar named Voss. The insectoid's mandibles clicked nervously as he spoke. Even the junior officers seemed unsettled by this assignment. "Tell them we'll consider their proposal," Zekthar replied, though he had no intention of doing so. The Vorthak Council of War had already decided. Earth's resources were too valuable to remain in the hands of such a primitive species. The humans' naivety would be their downfall. The irony wasn't lost on him. 3 cycles ago, when the humans had first been contacted, they had actually asked to join the Galactic Council as equals. The council chamber had erupted in what could generously be called laughter. A species that had barely achieved faster than light travel, requesting equal standing with civilizations that had mastered the fundamental forces of the universe? It was almost insulting. But then something unexpected had happened. The humans hadn't retreated in embarrassment or anger. They had simply smiled and said they understood. They would continue to grow and learn, and perhaps someday they would be ready. That patience had been mistaken for weakness by many council members. Zekthar now wondered if they had all made a terrible error in judgment. The intelligence reports had been troubling. In the 3 cycles since first contact, human technology had advanced at an unprecedented rate, not through conquest or theft, as was typical, but through what they called cooperation and innovation. They had reached out to smaller, non-council species and formed what they called the Independent Worlds Alliance. These partnerships had resulted in technological exchanges that defied conventional understanding. The Zentari, known for their defensive capabilities, had shared their shield technology with humans. In return, humans had provided something called adaptive algorithms that made those shields 30% more efficient. The aquatic Merdai had given humans their underwater construction techniques, and humans had given them atmospheric processors that could terraform ocean worlds in half the usual time. Every exchange seemed to benefit both parties in ways that the Council's economists couldn't fully explain. "Commander," Voss interrupted his thoughts again, "we're receiving transmissions from the human fleet." Zekthar's head snapped up. "Fleet? Our intelligence indicated they had perhaps a dozen vessels capable of void combat. Sir, our sensors are detecting significant activity. Admiral Mordoon is requesting your presence in the tactical center." The walk to the tactical center felt longer than usual. Zekthar's species, the Vorthak, prided themselves on their military precision and strategic superiority. Their motto, roughly translated, meant victory through overwhelming force. It had served them well for centuries. Every battle was won before it began, through superior numbers and firepower. The humans were about to learn why the Vorthak Empire controlled a quarter of the known galaxy. Admiral Mordoon was standing before a massive holographic display when Zekthar arrived. The old warrior's scarred face showed an expression that Zekthar had never seen before: uncertainty. "Report," Zekthar ordered. "The humans," Mordoon began, then stopped. The holographic display shifted to show the space surrounding Earth. What Zekthar saw made his stomach drop. Where intelligence had predicted a small defensive force, there were now thousands of vessels. Ships of designs he didn't recognize, formed into formations that seemed to follow no known tactical doctrine. "How many?" he asked quietly. "Current count is over 8,000 vessels, sir, and they're still arriving." "That's impossible. Our deep space monitors would have detected such a massive fleet movement." "Sir," a technician called out from across the room, "we're analyzing the ship configurations. They don't match any known human designs in our database." Zekthar moved to the technician station. The screen showed detailed scans of the human fleet. The ships were indeed unlike anything in the intelligence files. They seemed to incorporate design elements from dozens of different species: Zentari hull strengthening, Merdai environmental systems, even what appeared to be modified Vorthak weapon arrays. "They've been busy," Mordoon muttered. "Get me a communication channel with the human fleet," Zekthar ordered. "I want to speak to whoever's in command." The main view screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at a human. The creature was smaller than Zekthar had expected, with the typical soft features and pale skin of its species. But there was something in its eyes, a calm confidence that seemed out of place given the circumstances. "I'm Admiral Sarah Chen of the Independent World's Defense Fleet," the human said. Her voice was steady, showing no signs of fear or aggression. "I assume you're here to discuss the terms of the Vorthak Empire's withdrawal from our territory." Mordoon stepped forward. "Withdrawal? Human, you are facing the might of the Vorthak Third Fleet. You have one opportunity to surrender before we demonstrate why your species should have accepted our generous offer of protectorate status." Admiral Chen nodded thoughtfully. "I understand your position, Admiral Mordoon. Your reputation precedes you. 17 conquered systems. Over 200 successful campaigns. Very impressive." She paused. "However, I'm afraid we must decline your offer." "You decline?" Mordoon's voice rose. "Do you understand what you're facing? We have 500 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy. Our weapons can crack planets. Our shields can withstand stellar flares. What could you possibly have that would make you think you can stand against us?" Chen's expression didn't change. "Friends." Before anyone could respond, the tactical display exploded with new contacts. Ships were appearing throughout the system, not through hyperspace jumps, but materializing from what appeared to be some form of advanced cloaking. Zekthar watched in growing alarm as the count rose past 10,000, then 15,000, then 20,000 vessels. "Sir," the sensor operator called out, his voice cracking with stress. "We're identifying ships from the Zentari Defense Corps, Merdai Deep Fleet, Kithara Mining Guild, and, sir, there are at least 40 different species represented in this fleet." "How is this possible?" Zekthar whispered. Chen answered as if she had heard him. 3 years ago, when we first asked to join the Galactic Council, we were told we weren't ready." "You were probably right. We weren't ready to play the game the way you've been playing it for millennia. But we learned something important during that rejection. We learned that there are a lot of species out there who are tired of that game." The display showed the massive Allied fleet beginning to form into battle formations. But these weren't the rigid, predictable formations that Zekthar knew from centuries of galactic warfare. Instead, the ships moved in fluid, organic patterns that seemed to adapt and shift in real time. "The Independent Worlds Alliance isn't just about trade agreements or mutual defense pacts," Chen continued. "It's about something that apparently the Council forgot was possible: genuine cooperation. When the Zentari shared their shield technology with us, they didn't just give us the specifications. They taught our engineers how to think about defense differently. When we shared our computing algorithms with them, we didn't just hand over code. We worked together to create something neither of us could have built alone." Mordoon activated his ship's tactical systems. "Enough talk. All ships, prepare for battle. We'll show these primitives what real power looks like." "Admiral," Chen said quietly, I really hope you'll reconsider. Nobody needs to die today. The only ones dying will be you and your allies, Mordun snarled. The first Vorthak ships opened fire, sending streams of plasma toward the human-led fleet. Zekthar watched the tactical display, expecting to see the satisfying bloom of destroyed enemy vessels. Instead, he witnessed something that defied everything he knew about space combat. The Allied fleet didn't scatter or seek cover. Instead, they moved toward the incoming fire. But as the plasma streams approached, something extraordinary happened. The ships began to dance. There was no other word for it. They weaved between the energy beams with impossible precision, as if they could predict exactly where each shot would go. Evasive maneuvers are impossible at those ranges, Mordun muttered. The reaction time required. His words were cut off as the Allied fleet returned fire. But instead of the chaotic barrage Zekthar expected from such a diverse group of ships, the weapons fire was perfectly coordinated. Streams of energy from different ships merged and focused on individual Vorthak vessels with surgical precision. The first Vorthak ship to be hit, the cruiser Iron Talon, should have been able to withstand the incoming fire easily. Its shields were rated to deflect anything short of a battleship's main cannon, but the combined fire from the Allied fleet seemed to find the exact frequency needed to overload the shield generators. The ship was disabled in seconds, its crew unharmed but helpless. How did they know our shield frequencies? Mordun demanded. Chen's voice came through the communication channel again. 3 months ago, you attacked a Cathara mining station. The survivors shared the tactical data from that battle with us. 2 months ago, you destroyed a Zentari hospital ship. Again, we learned from what you did. Every species you've conquered, every battle you've fought, has been a lesson for us. More Vorthak ships were being systematically disabled. Not destroyed, disabled. It was becoming clear that the Allied fleet was deliberately avoiding fatal strikes. Sir, the sensor operator reported, the enemy fleet is using some kind of networked combat system. All their ships are sharing targeting data and tactical information in real time. It's like fighting one massive organism instead of thousands of individual ships. Zekthar felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had seen many innovative tactics over the years, but nothing like this. The Allied fleet moved with a coordination that should have been impossible. Ships from dozens of different species, using completely different technologies and combat doctrines, somehow fighting as if they shared a single mind. All ships, fall back to defensive formation Omega, Mordun ordered. It was the command formation that had never failed. The Vorthak fleet, a tight sphere that allowed each ship to support the others while focusing maximum firepower on any threat. The Vorthak fleet began to regroup, but the Allied fleet followed, maintaining their fluid formations. As they approached, something new appeared on the tactical display. The human ships, which had seemed relatively small and insignificant compared to the others, suddenly began to transform. Sections of their hulls folded back, revealing weapon systems that definitely hadn't been in the intelligence reports. But more than that, they began connecting to the ships around them. Physically connecting. With docking tubes and energy conduits that turned groups of individual vessels into larger, more complex structures. Modular ship design, Chen explained, apparently monitoring their communications. Another thing we learned from our allies. The Cathara showed us how to build ships that could be reconfigured for different missions. The Merdai taught us about distributed systems that could operate as independent units or connected networks. We just combined the concepts. What Zekthar was watching defied every principle of naval architecture he knew. Ships weren't supposed to be able to connect and disconnect in the middle of battle. The stress forces alone should have torn them apart. But somehow, the Allied fleet was transforming itself in real time, adapting its configuration to match the tactical situation. The defensive formation that had served the Vorthak Empire for centuries suddenly seemed obsolete. The Allied fleet flowed around it like water around a stone, striking from multiple angles simultaneously, while avoiding the concentrated firepower that made the formation so effective. Sir, Voss reported, his voice barely steady. We're receiving surrender requests from 17 ships. The crews are unharmed, but their vessels have been completely disabled. Zekthar looked at the tactical display. In less than 10 minutes, nearly 40% of his fleet had been neutralized. Not destroyed, but rendered helpless. It was a level of precision that spoke to tactical capabilities beyond anything he had ever encountered. "Admiral Chen," he said, opening a communication channel. "What do you want?" "The same thing we've always wanted," she replied. "To be left alone to live our lives in peace. Your ships are welcome to leave our territory at any time. Your crews will be returned safely once you're clear of our borders. And if we refuse?" Chen's expression grew sad. "Then we'll continue to disable your ships until you change your mind. We really don't want to hurt anyone." Mordoun's scarred face twisted with rage. "You think you've won? This is one fleet. The Vorthak Empire commands thousands of ships across dozens of worlds. Even if you defeat us here, the Council will send everything they have to crush your pathetic alliance." "We know," Chen said simply. "We're counting on it." The words sent a chill through Zekthar. There was something in the human's tone, a confidence that suggested this battle was just the beginning of something much larger, something that the Galactic Council was completely unprepared for. "Signal all ships," Zekthar said quietly. "Prepare to withdraw." "Sir?" Mordoun stared at him in disbelief. "You heard the order. We're leaving." As the surviving Vorthok ships began their retreat, Zekthar found himself staring at the view screen, where Admiral Chen still waited patiently. For the first time in his military career, he had encountered something that truly frightened him. Not the overwhelming firepower or superior numbers that he was used to facing, but something far more dangerous, an enemy that fought with compassion, that treated surrender with mercy, and that somehow turned diversity into strength. The humans had asked to join the Galactic Council as equals 3 years ago. They had been rejected. Now, Zekthar was beginning to suspect that they no longer needed the Council's approval. They were building something new, something that made the old ways of conquest and domination look primitive and obsolete. As the Vorthak fleet limped toward the edge of the system, Zekthar couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a military defeat. It was the beginning of the end of everything the galaxy had known for thousands of years. And somehow, he wasn't sure that was a bad thing. The Galactic Council's emergency session had been in progress for 6 hours, and Councillor Prime Velkash was beginning to understand why his predecessors had developed a drinking problem. The massive chamber, with its representatives from 87 different species, had devolved into chaos the moment news of the Vorthak defeat had arrived. "Order." Velkash's voice boomed through the chamber's acoustic system, enhanced to penetrate the cacophony of clicks, roars, and harmonics that passed for debate among the various species. "The chair will have order." The Thurian representative, a massive crystalline being whose voice resonated like breaking glass, rose from its platform. "The humans must be dealt with immediately. Their actions constitute an act of war against a council member state." "The Vorthak Empire attacked first," countered the Zelani delegate, her ethereal form flickering with agitation. "The humans merely defended themselves." "Defended themselves?" The Korvan War Minister's laugh was a harsh bark. "They destroyed 47 Vorthak warships." "Disabled," Velkash corrected, consulting his datapad. "According to the reports, the human-led alliance disabled the ships and released the crews unharmed. No fatalities have been reported." This statement caused another eruption of noise from the assembly. In the Council's long history, mercy toward defeated enemies was considered either weakness or elaborate psychological warfare. The concept that an enemy might genuinely wish to avoid unnecessary death was foreign to most representatives. The Vorthak delegate, Admiral Mordoun himself, stood slowly. His scarred face bore the weight of the first military defeat in his species' recent history. "Council Prime, with respect, the methodology is irrelevant. These humans have demonstrated capabilities that were completely unknown to our intelligence services. They commanded a fleet of over 20,000 vessels, incorporating technology from dozens of species. This represents a fundamental shift in the balance of power. Velkosh studied the tactical reports that had been flooding in since the battle. The more he read, the more concerned he became. The humans hadn't just won a battle, they had revolutionized the very concept of naval warfare. Their ability to coordinate ships from different species, using different technologies and fighting doctrines, suggested a level of tactical innovation that the Council hadn't seen in centuries. "What do we know about this Independent Worlds Alliance?" he asked his aide, a efficient Kreltar named Sis. "Intelligence gathering has been challenging," Sis replied. "The Alliance appears to include over 60 species, most of which were previously considered too minor to warrant Council attention. They've established trade networks, shared technology exchanges, and mutual defense pacts that operate completely outside Council authority. 60 species." The Morellian representative's tentacles writhed in agitation. "How did we miss such a massive diplomatic initiative?" "Because we weren't looking," admitted Intelligence Director Quintal, a spider-like arachnoid whose multiple eyes reflected shame. "Our monitoring systems focus on potential threats to Council members. Minor species forming trade relationships didn't trigger any alerts." Velkosh felt the beginning of what his species called a thought storm, a mental state that preceded either breakthrough, understanding, or complete panic. "Show me the economic data." The chamber's main display activated, showing trade flowcharts and economic indicators. What Velkosh saw made his situation even worse. The Independent Worlds Alliance hadn't just been building military capabilities, they had created an entirely parallel economic system. Resource extraction efficiency in Alliance territory has increased by an average of 47%, Sis reported. Manufacturing output has tripled. Most significantly, their research and development capabilities appear to be advancing exponentially. "How is that possible?" demanded the Thurian representative. Dr. Yethera, the Council's chief xenosociologist, stepped forward. The elderly Velian's crystalline features reflected the chamber's lights as she spoke. "I've been studying the Alliance's organizational structure. It's unlike anything we've encountered. Instead of the hierarchical systems that most civilizations develop, they appear to use what humans call collaborative networks." "Explain," Velkosh ordered. "Traditional Council governance operates on dominance hierarchies," Yethara continued. "Stronger species control weaker ones. Advanced civilizations guide primitive ones. Established powers limit emerging ones. The Alliance appears to operate on the principle that diversity of thought and capability leads to better solutions than homogeneity." The chamber fell silent. The concept was so alien to most representatives that they struggled to process it. "You're suggesting," the Corvan War Minister said slowly, "that they're stronger because they include weak members?" "Not weak," Yethara corrected. "Different. Each species brings unique perspectives and capabilities. The humans seem to have developed systems for integrating these differences into collaborative advantages, rather than managing them as hierarchical relationships." Velkosh's thought storm was approaching critical mass. "What are the military implications?" Admiral Mordoon answered. "In practical terms, it means they can adapt faster than we can plan. During the battle, their fleet configurations changed continuously based on our tactical responses. It was like fighting an opponent who could evolve in real time." "And the economic implications?" "If their growth rates continue," Sis calculated quickly, "the Alliance will control more resources than the Council within 10 cycles. Their technological advancement rate suggests they could surpass our capabilities in half that time." The chamber erupted again, but this time the noise carried a different quality fear. For the first time in anyone's memory, the Galactic Council was facing an existential threat to its dominance. "What are our options?" Velkosh asked. Military Director Zokval, a heavily armored Rexian, stood at attention. "We could mobilize the full Council fleet. Combined, we command over 50,000 vessels. Even with their innovations, the Alliance cannot match such numbers." "Can't they, Doctor?" Yethara interjected. "They've demonstrated the ability to coordinate complex multi-species operations. What happens when they apply those same principles to ship construction? How quickly could they expand their fleet if 60 species were working together instead of separately?" "There's another consideration," Admiral Mordoon added grimly. During our retreat, we monitored their communications. They weren't celebrating victory or discussing pursuit. They were already planning relief efforts for our disabled crews and discussing how to improve their own defensive capabilities. Meaning? Meaning they're thinking long-term. This wasn't opportunistic expansion or territorial conquest. They have a comprehensive strategy that extends far beyond single battles. Counselor Prime Velkash found himself facing a decision that would define the next era of galactic history. The traditional response would be overwhelming military force crush the Alliance before it could grow stronger. But the humans had already demonstrated that traditional approaches might not work against their unconventional methods. What would happen, he asked slowly, if we attempted diplomatic contact? The question caused another pause in the chamber's discussions. Diplomatic contact with inferior species was typically limited to surrender negotiations. The humans have repeatedly expressed interest in dialogue, Sis reported. Even during the recent battle, Admiral Chen offered multiple opportunities for peaceful resolution. They want to talk, the Thurian representative said dismissively. All primitives want to negotiate when facing superior force. The question is whether we waste time listening to their babbling. With respect, Dr. Yethera interrupted, the humans are no longer primitive. The technological innovations displayed during the battle suggest they've achieved advancement rates that exceed our own. Additionally, their alliance structure means that any negotiations wouldn't be just with humans, but with 60 species acting in concert. Velkash realized that the Council was facing something unprecedented in its history. A potential peer competitor. Every previous threat had been manageable through either overwhelming force or technological superiority. The Alliance seemed to have found a way to neutralize both advantages. Open a communication channel to the Alliance leadership, he decided. We'll hear what they have to say. The main view screen activated, showing the bridge of what appeared to be a human vessel. Admiral Chen appeared, flanked by representatives from several Alliance species. Her expression was calm and professional, showing no signs of triumph or aggression despite her recent victory. Counselor Prime Velkash, she said with what seemed like genuine respect. Thank you for opening this dialogue. I hope we can find a path forward that benefits everyone. Admiral Chen, you've demonstrated remarkable military capabilities. What are your intentions regarding Council territory? We have no territorial ambitions beyond our current borders, Chen replied without hesitation. The Alliance exists for mutual support and cooperation among member species. We're not interested in conquest or expansion through force. Then why build such a massive military fleet? Chen's expression grew serious. Because history has shown us that peaceful species often become extinct species. The Alliance fleet exists purely for defensive purposes. We hope never to use it again. The Corvan War Minister leaned forward. You claim peaceful intentions. Yet you've demonstrated the ability to defeat Council forces. How do we know you won't change your mind about conquest? You don't, Chen admitted. Just as we don't know whether the Council will decide to launch a larger attack against us. That's why we need to establish new frameworks for interaction. What kind of frameworks? Velkash asked. Mutual recognition of sovereignty. Trade agreements that benefit all parties. Technology sharing that advances everyone's capabilities. Peaceful resolution mechanisms for conflicts. Chen paused. In short, the kind of relationship the humans originally requested when we first contacted the Council. The chamber fell silent again. Velkash could sense the representatives struggling with concepts that challenged fundamental assumptions about galactic politics. The Council operates on the principle of hierarchical stability, he said carefully. Stronger civilizations guide weaker ones to prevent chaos and conflict. What you're describing sounds like anarchy. Thank you for watching. Follow Enderscribe 75. If you not reventers the tenaltations by the 25 way of frunds, upon. It's now one. Upon. We call it cooperation, Chen replied. And it's been working remarkably well for the Alliance members. Dr. Yethera stepped forward. Admiral, could you explain how your Alliance maintains stability without hierarchical control? Do those, Chen smiled. Dr. Yethera, isn't it? I've read your papers on xenosociological structures. Very insightful work. She paused to organize her thoughts. The Alliance operates on the principle that every species has something valuable to contribute. Decisions are made through collaborative consensus rather than hierarchical decree. When conflicts arise, we focus on finding solutions that address everyone's needs, rather than determining who has the right to impose their will. That sounds impossibly idealistic. The Thurian representative interjected. It would be, if it was just idealism, Chen agreed. But it's backed by practical systems and structures. For example, our shared technology network allows member species to adapt innovations for their specific needs, rather than simply adopting foreign systems wholesale. Our economic frameworks distribute benefits based on contribution, rather than relative power. Our defense systems prioritize protection over projection of force. Velkash found himself genuinely curious about these systems. In his long career in council politics, he had seen countless attempts at reform fail because they didn't address the fundamental competitive dynamics that drove interstellar relations. How do you prevent stronger members from dominating weaker ones? He asked. By making strength contextual rather than absolute, Chen replied. The Zentari have the best defensive technology, so they lead security planning. The Merdai understand terraforming better than anyone, so they guide environmental projects. Humans apparently have good systems integration skills, so we help coordinate joint operations. Leadership rotates based on expertise and project needs, and when there are genuine conflicts of interest, we've developed mediation protocols that focus on finding creative solutions rather than zero-sum competitions. It turns out that most conflicts arise from miscommunication or limited thinking about possible outcomes. Admiral Mordoon looked skeptical. These systems might work among similar species with comparable power levels. What happens when you encounter truly superior or inferior civilizations? Chen's expression grew thoughtful. We treat them the same way we treat everyone else, with respect and curiosity about what they might teach us. The Alliance has learned something important. There's no such thing as a truly inferior civilization. Every species that survived long enough to achieve spaceflight has solved problems that others haven't faced. Every culture has developed insights that others missed. The question isn't whether someone is superior or inferior, it's whether we're smart enough to learn from each other. The implications of her words settled over the chamber like a heavy blanket. The entire foundation of council authority rested on the principle that some civilizations were inherently superior to others, qualified to guide and control those beneath them in the hierarchy. You're suggesting that the council's entire governmental structure is flawed, Velkash said quietly. I'm suggesting that it's based on assumptions that might not serve anyone's long-term interests, Chen replied diplomatically. The council has maintained stability for a long time, and that's valuable. But stability at the cost of growth and innovation may not be sustainable indefinitely. What alternative do you propose? Parallel development. The Alliance has no desire to replace or overthrow the Council. We'd like to coexist and learn from each other. If our approaches prove effective, perhaps some Council members might choose to adopt similar methods. If they don't, no one is forced to change anything. It was, Velkash realized, a fundamentally different approach to interstellar relations. Instead of conquest or submission, the humans were proposing voluntary evolution, and if the Council views your continued existence as a threat, Chen's expression grew sad. Then we'll defend ourselves, just as we did against the Vorthak fleet. But we hope it doesn't come to that. War serves no one's interests. The communication ended, leaving the chamber in contemplative silence. Velkash looked around at the representatives, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in their various faces and forms. The Council faced a choice that would determine the future of galactic civilization. They could attempt to destroy the Alliance before it grew stronger, risking a war against an enemy that had already demonstrated superior tactical capabilities. Or they could attempt the unprecedented step of coexisting with a peer competitor whose very existence challenged the foundations of their authority. Either choice would change everything. Velkash just hoped they would choose wisely. 6 months after the Battle of Earth, as historians would later call it, Commander Zekthar stood in his quarters aboard a transport vessel, staring out at the stars and trying to understand how everything had changed so quickly. The Vorthak Empire, which had seemed invincible just a year ago, was crumbling from within. Not from external attack, but from something far more dangerous. Hope. His door chimed, and he turned to see Voss entering with a data pad and an expression of barely controlled excitement that had become increasingly common among the younger officers. "Sir, you need to see this," Voss said, his mandibles clicking rapidly in the way that indicated either extreme stress or extreme excitement. In this case, Zekthar suspected it was the latter. The datapad showed industrial output reports from across the Vorthak Empire. But these weren't the grim statistics of declining production that had marked the past few months. Instead, Zekthar saw dramatic increases in efficiency, output, and innovation. "I don't understand," he said. "Our factories have been experiencing workforce shortages and supply disruptions since the Alliance trade embargo began." "Yes, sir. But look at where the increases are occurring." Zekthar studied the data more carefully. The improvements were concentrated in systems where local governments had begun implementing what they called collaborative management structures. Instead of the traditional hierarchical control systems, these facilities were allowing workers from different species to contribute ideas and take leadership roles in their areas of expertise. Zekthar paused, struggling to find words. "This is essentially adopting Alliance organizational principles." "Yes, sir. And it's spreading. 17 systems have officially requested permission to restructure their governance along similar lines." Zekthar set down the datapad and walked back to his viewport. In the distance, he could see the lights of a massive space station, one of the new neutral trading posts that had been established at the border between Council and Alliance territories. Ships from dozens of different species came and went in carefully choreographed patterns, exchanging goods, ideas, and technologies in ways that would have been unthinkable just a year ago. "Sir," Voss continued hesitantly, "there's something else. I've been monitoring communications from the Council core worlds. Similar developments are occurring throughout their territory." "Show me." The datapad displayed news reports, industrial statistics, and diplomatic communications from across the galaxy. Everywhere Zekthar looked, he saw the same pattern. Species that had been rigidly controlled by Council authority were beginning to experiment with Alliance-style cooperation. The Thurian mining colonies had increased their output by 60% after adopting joint decision-making processes that included input from all worker species. The Korvan agricultural worlds had solved persistent crop disease problems by collaborating with previously ignored botanical specialists from subject species. Even the rigid military hierarchies of the Rexian Defense Corps were experimenting with mixed species command structures. "It's like a virus," Zekthar muttered. "But instead of destroying, it's improving everything it touches." "Sir, I've been thinking," Voss said carefully. "What if it's not really about government structures or military tactics? What if it's about something more fundamental?" "Explain." "The humans keep talking about treating other species with respect and learning from everyone. But that's not a governmental system, that's a way of thinking. A philosophy." Zekthar considered this. In his long military career, he had conquered worlds and subjugated species, always believing that strength came from domination and control. The humans had demonstrated something that challenged every assumption he had ever held about power and leadership. "Are you suggesting that the humans have found a way to weaponize kindness?" Voss's mandibles clicked in what Zekthar had learned to recognize as his species' equivalent of nervous laughter. "Sir, I think they've found a way to make kindness more powerful than weapons." Before Zekthar could respond, his communication system activated. The familiar face of Admiral Chen appeared on his screen, though she was clearly calling from a different ship than the one he had seen during the battle 6 months ago. "Commander Zekthar, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Admiral Chen, to what do I owe this unexpected communication? I wanted to extend an invitation. The Alliance is hosting a technological symposium next month at Sanctuary Station. We'll be sharing recent innovations in defensive systems, resource management, and collaborative logistics. I thought you might be interested in attending." Zekthar stared at her. You're inviting a Vorthak military commander to observe Alliance military technology? I'm inviting someone who's demonstrated wisdom and restraint to participate in discussions about making the galaxy a better place for everyone, Chen corrected gently. Your tactical expertise would be valuable, especially your insights into traditional military doctrine and how it might be adapted for defensive purposes. Admiral, I must point out that I'm still technically an enemy officer. Chen smiled. Commander, the Alliance doesn't really have enemies. We have people who disagree with us, people who haven't had the chance to learn about us yet, and people who are actively trying to harm us. You fall into the first category, which means we'd like to help you understand our perspective better. And if I refuse, then you refuse. No consequences, no retaliation. The invitation remains open if you change your mind. After the communication ended, Zekthar sat in silence for several minutes, processing what had just occurred. A human admiral had offered sensitive military information to a representative of a hostile empire, with no demands or conditions attached. It was either breathtaking naivety or profound confidence. Sir, Voss said quietly. What are you going to do? Zekthar looked at his aide, young, eager, and increasingly influenced by the new ideas that were spreading across the galaxy. I'm going to attend their symposium. Sir, if we're going to understand what we're truly facing, we need to see it for ourselves. 3 weeks later, Zekthar found himself aboard Sanctuary Station, a massive collaborative construction project that had been built by 17 different species using shared resources and technologies. The station was unlike anything he had ever seen. Instead of the rigid geometric forms that characterized most military or governmental structures, Sanctuary Station seemed to grow and flow like a living organism. The technological symposium was even more remarkable than the station itself. Engineers and scientists from dozens of species worked together in mixed groups, sharing ideas and building on each other's concepts in real time. Zekthar watched a Zentari defensive specialist collaborate with a human systems analyst and a Merdai environmental engineer to develop a shield technology that was more efficient than anything any of them could have created, individually. Impressive, isn't it? Admiral Chen appeared beside him as he observed one of the working groups. Disturbing, Zekthar replied honestly. Your people are sharing advanced military technology with species that were strangers to them a few years ago. Why is that disturbing? Because they could use that technology against you. Chen nodded thoughtfully. They could, but they probably won't. How can you be so confident? Because we're giving them something more valuable than weapons. We're giving them hope for a better future. People don't usually attack those who are helping them build the lives they want to live. Zekthar watched the working groups for several more minutes, trying to understand the dynamics he was witnessing. There was no visible hierarchy, no chain of command, no enforcement mechanism, yet somehow, dozens of beings from completely different species and cultures were working together with a level of coordination that would have impressed any military commander. How do you maintain discipline without authority? We don't maintain discipline, Chen replied. We maintain purpose. When everyone is working toward the same goals, discipline becomes voluntary. And when people disagree about those goals, then we negotiate, compromise, or find creative alternatives. It takes longer than giving orders, but the solutions tend to be more effective and longer lasting. Zekthar spent the next 3 days at the symposium, observing, questioning, and gradually beginning to understand what he was witnessing. The Alliance hadn't just developed new military tactics or governmental structures, they had discovered a fundamentally different approach to civilization itself. On his final day at the station, he attended a session called Conflict Resolution Through Creative Problem Solving. The session was led by Dr. Yethara, the Velian xenosociologist from the Council, who had apparently defected to the Alliance several months earlier. Traditional conflict resolution operates on the assumption that resources are scarce and that one party must win at the expense of the other. Dr. Yethara explained to the diverse audience. But when you add multiple perspectives and collaborative thinking to any problem, you often discover that the original assumptions were incorrect. She presented a case study involving a resource dispute between 2 Alliance member species. Both groups had claimed exclusive rights to a mineral-rich asteroid field, leading to tensions that could have escalated to warfare. Instead of arbitrating the dispute or assigning the resources to the stronger party, alliance mediators had facilitated a collaborative analysis of what each species actually needed. It turned out that one species needed the rare metals for manufacturing, while the other needed the common materials for construction. By working together, they had developed mining and processing techniques that gave each species what they actually needed while leaving the asteroid field more productive than before. The key insight, Dr. Yethara continued, was that the conflict wasn't really about the asteroids. It was about meeting the underlying needs of both species. Once we understood that, finding a solution became a technical challenge rather than a political battle. After the session, Zekthar approached Dr. Yethara. Doctor, I have a question about implementation. These collaborative approaches work well for voluntary participants. But what happens when you encounter genuinely hostile actors, species that prefer conquest to cooperation? Dr. Yethara's crystalline features reflected the station's lights as she considered the question. We defend ourselves, just as we did against the Vorthak fleet, but we also try to understand why they chose hostility. Often, aggressive behavior stems from fear, scarcity, or past trauma. If we can address those underlying causes, we can sometimes transform enemies into allies. And if you can't, then we contain the threat while continuing to offer alternatives. Some conflicts take generations to resolve, but we've learned that patience and persistence often succeed where force fails. Zekthar nodded slowly. You're describing a very long-term approach to galactic politics. Commander, the Alliance is thinking in terms of centuries, not years. We're not trying to win temporary victories, we're trying to build sustainable peace. On his journey back to Vorthak space, Zekthar found himself reviewing everything he had seen and learned. The Alliance wasn't just a military threat or a political movement, it was a new way of understanding what civilization could become. When he arrived at Vorthak Command, he was summoned immediately to report to the War Council. The chamber was filled with the familiar faces of the Empire's military leadership, but their expressions showed strain and uncertainty that hadn't been there a year ago. Report, commanded Supreme General Korthak. The Alliance poses a greater threat than we initially assessed, Zekthar began. But not in the way we expected. Explain. Their military capabilities are formidable. But their true danger lies in their ability to make cooperation more attractive than conquest. They're not trying to defeat us, they're trying to make us irrelevant. The council chamber fell silent. Supreme General Korthak leaned forward. Irrelevant how? By demonstrating that there are alternatives to the way we've always done things. Every successful collaboration between Alliance species, every peaceful resolution of conflicts, every innovation that emerges from their cooperative approach weakens the justification for hierarchical control systems like ours. Are you suggesting that the Vorthak Empire abandoned the principles that have made us strong? Zekthar took a deep breath. Sir, I'm suggesting that those principles may no longer be making us strong. Our industrial output is falling behind Alliance territories. Our subject species are becoming increasingly difficult to control. Our military advantages are being neutralized by their superior coordination. So what do you recommend? I recommend that we stop trying to defeat them and start trying to learn from them. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Half the council erupted in outrage at the suggestion, while the other half demanded detailed explanations. But Zekthar could see something else in their eyes, curiosity, and perhaps hope. In the months that followed, the Vorthak Empire began what historians would later call the Great Transition. It wasn't a sudden revolution or dramatic reform, but a gradual evolution toward the collaborative principles that the Alliance had demonstrated. Some systems adopted the changes quickly and saw immediate improvements. Others resisted and gradually fell behind their neighbors. The Galactic Council faced similar pressures and choices. Some member species embraced cooperative approaches and thrived. Others clung to traditional hierarchies and found themselves increasingly isolated. Admiral Chen's prediction proved accurate. They hadn't needed to conquer anyone. The Alliance model was so obviously superior that it spread through voluntary adoption rather than military force. 5 years after the Battle of Earth, Zekthar found himself serving as a liaison officer between the former Vorthak Empire and the expanded Alliance. His office was on a joint research station where scientists from over 100 species worked together on projects that would have been unimaginable under the old system. He often thought about Admiral Chen's words during that first battle that the Alliance was counting on the Council, sending everything they had. She had been right. The Alliance hadn't feared the Council's response, because they knew something the Council didn't understand at the time. Ideas that improve people's lives don't need to be imposed by force. They spread naturally, like seeds on favorable wind. Looking back, Zekthar realized that the humans hadn't stormed any battlefield in the traditional sense. They had simply offered a better way of living and allowed others to choose freely. That choice, repeated across thousands of worlds and hundreds of species, had transformed the galaxy more completely than any conquest could have achieved. The stars no longer shivered with fear of war and domination. Instead, they sparkled with the light of countless civilizations learning, growing, and building something better together. And at the center of it all were the humans, not as conquerors or rulers, but as patient teachers who had shown the galaxy that kindness could indeed be the greatest weapon of all.